Hello Horror Hounds, as voted for by Deadly Dames Horror Extravaganza, Benign Crinoid and Masquerade as Sane. We have from Japan 1977's Hausu, aka House, directed by Nobuhiko Obayashi. I should have practiced that before I started the video. I saw this for the first time 2 days ago, and I've been mulling it over since to try and get my thoughts straight, and just came to the conclusion that my thoughts will probably never be straight on this film. I first heard of this film through an online article that was called something like the 10 most mind-boggling or 10 most bonkers or 10 most bizarre horror films you'll ever see. What do I say? If you've seen it, you know why I'm struggling. If you haven't seen it, be like, well, get on with it, man. What's the fucking film about? Ostensibly, the film is about 7 Japanese schoolgirls for their summer holidays visiting the countryside and the house of an aunt of one of them. And then the house eats them. So, okay, 7 girls go to a house and the house eats them. Already, if you haven't seen this film, in your head, you're building up some sort of idea of what that film looks like. And yet, you have absolutely no idea. I've done a wee bit of reading up after I've watched the film. It begs investigation after you've seen the film. I'm definitely going to keep returning to this film. You have no choice but to. As it flashed before my eyes, I took in probably 1% of what was going on. The context that this movie was made in is insane. Japanese movie companies were losing money. They were tanking badly. Kids weren't going to see movies at the time. Television was becoming ubiquitous, and so were the American blockbusters coming over. And at the time, in Japan, they had a studio system. You worked your apprenticeship. If you wanted to work in movies, you worked your apprenticeship. You signed up onto the company, they assigned you to a department, whatever department. It doesn't matter if you wanted to be a director, they could assign you to whatever department they saw fit, and you worked through the ranks up to assistant director, and then you waited until you got the opportunity to direct, until you'd done the service. There was a wave of sort of experimental filmmakers, 8mm, 16mm, completely outside the studio system, and this guy got tapped up by Toho to work doing TV commercials for them, and he did about 2,000 TV commercials. Toho, with the instruction of make us something like Jaws, gave this guy a blank check to make his movie. And as with any I guess any creative person, completely bankrolled and completely unhindered by any restrictions placed on that artistic expression. He went hog wild. At times, it reminds me of kids bouncing around, hopped up on E-numbers. It reminds me of those slushies you can buy at the cinema before you go in to watch the film that almost glow because the colour of them is no colour that exists in nature. Synthesized fucking manic energy. That is kind of what Hausu is like. It's not even really a horror film, except it's also a satire on horror films, except it's also turns romantic, but a satire on romance films. It turns it's a film about you know, the long hot summer, that, you know, those nostalgic childhood summer holidays we have, and yet it's a satire of those. Turns it's a comedy. There is a whimsy about it, and that's probably, forgive me if I keep coming back to that word, but it is apposite. I wrote Evil Dead 2 because it's okay, 77, so you will see there are some Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 moments in here, but there's also stuff in this that made me think of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the album cover, and the Beatles cartoon The Yellow Submarine. There's things in there that remind me of Japanese anime tropes, and also Eastern fantasy storytelling like Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle from Studio Ghibli. Huge sections of it are very dreamlike. This is a time way before computer trickeries, so it's ram-packed full of every sort of in-camera trick you can think of. So in a way, it's the hyper and manic cousin of the Francis Coppola film Bram Stoker's Dracula, where everything in that was in camera, except that's more sedate, more stately, more mature. This is the crazy younger cousin that got there first and did it all first and decided, I'm going to do all of it now, everything now. Everything goes into this movie. Maybe he was thinking, do you know what? I might not get a second chance to make a feature film. I'm going to do everything now. It's almost a completely new language of cinema, and you will either roll with it or you will loathe it. There's never establishing shot, two shot, close up, reverse angle, close up. There's never any of that. All of that sort of standard language of filmmaking that we've come to understand just is completely and utterly gone. Instead, you'll get a shot like this, and it'll be a group talking, and then he'll pick out one of the group. He'll draw your attention. Go, okay, all of this is going on. This is a really busy frame here, but then and he'll iris in, and the screen will go black. Apart from, he'll iris in on one of the characters here and go, now just look at this person here. You didn't notice that, and then come back out, and the scene will carry on, and he'll just draw your attention here and there. Other times, the group shot will be going on, and instead of cutting to the close-up, he'll put a big iris right in the middle of the screen and give someone their close-up whilst the scene is still playing out, whilst the group shot is still playing out. The close-up will intrude in it. Do you remember the scene in Bram Stoker's Dracula where Dracula takes Mina out and is wooing her, and after a few glasses of absinthe across the table, he's having a conversation with her about Elisabetta, his lost love, and you've got his face here, her face here, and then the middle of the screen becomes the story that he's telling her, and you see Elisabetta falling, and you see a sort of stylized version of what happened at the start of the movie. Stuff like that is sort of matured and refined techniques of shit that's going on like fucking batshit crazy all over the place in Hausu, in this movie. There are all of these matte paintings. The sky are matte paintings. It's sort of like a candy floss reality, sweeter than sweet, too perfect. When they step off the train in the countryside and outside the carriage, you can see the countryside, and it's a matte painting. And then the train moves away. It's literally a painting on the platform, and then the camera pulls back, and beyond this hyper-realized vista of the countryside is another slightly more realistic but still painted vista of the countryside. And then they slowly move beyond this sort of idealized idea of the countryside into the reality of it, and the house that does eat them. I've never stopped and rewound a movie to watch bits that just went by in a flash more on first watching than I have in this film. Normally I like to sit and watch, and you know, occasionally there'll be a what the fuck moment and you have to rewind it and see it again, but normally you like to, the first time you watch a movie, watch the movie as it unfolds. But I was stopping it, rewinding it, going frame by frame. So I'm not completely convinced it lands all the punches it wants to. Something slightly more considered and slightly more focused could have been much more effective, and everyone could know about this film, rather than it being this bizarre curiosity that you know, you'll get people round and put it on and go, just watch this, you won't fucking believe this movie. I think at its heart, its sharpest teeth are reserved for romanticism. You have the aunt who is alone, Miss Havisham-like, in her house, waiting for the return of her fiance, who went off to fight in the war and died when the Hiroshima bomb was dropped. But he promised her that he'd come back, and she believes that he will come back. This sort of clinging to the romantic ideal has sort of kept her spirit alive beyond death. She's become a sort of vampiric wraith, almost absorbed by the house, and it now feeds on the bodies and the life energy of young, virginal, unmarried girls, so that the aunt and the house can maintain this state of waiting. At the same time, her niece, whose mother died 8 years ago, still maintains and clings to this romantic ideal of her mother, and that her marriage to her father was the most romantic thing ever, and she gets a real bee in her bonnet about the fact that her dad has now found someone else, because, you know, how can you break this pact with this ideal love that you had? The idea that the house has to eat unmarried virginal young girls really plays into that as well. Right at the start of the movie, the kids are getting all excited because they've heard one of their teachers is getting married, and they're saying, oh, I bet it's a love match, and she says, with a strange look in her eye and a strange quality to her voice, no, it's an arranged marriage, without passing judgment on it. But it's just a different thing. The film is obsessed with the state of being married and the state of being unmarried, and the house will consume you one way or another. And I guess if at that time you were a woman who was getting married, your destiny would be to I suppose it's fair to say you would be consumed by your marital home. That would then be your existence, the marital home, to keep it, to sustain it. So we have this house of an unmarried woman waiting for her fiance to return, who sustains itself by consuming unmarried women. That's as deep as I'm going to go, analytically wise. It's a wild ride. I'm going to stick I'll find a trailer and I'll stick a link to the trailer below, and check that out to get an idea, some sort of idea of what I've been rambling on about. It is a film that does seem to make one gabble, so I apologise for that. But next up, I will gabble just as equally for this, but much more straightforward, although not completely straightforward. George A. Romero's Martin.